humanity carries many traits: greed, love, the hunger that drives each of us forward, whatever shape it takes. These traits are the marrow of what it means to be a being at all, and countless stories have tried to capture them. Tonight, we speak of a story that wears the mask of monsters and demons. Yet at its heart, it belongs to humans, to the heights their ambition can climb, and the depths their heresy can sink to. Heights and depths that rival even the desires of the immortals themselves. A dark story, born from a dark world. So rest beside me, and let me unravel for you the threads of this story. It is long, and it will take us many nights to walk it fully. Let me tell you its first telling, and if it draws you in, be assured there will be more, night after night. So let us begin where the story begins, from the point it chose for itself. The tale of the Black Swordsman begins in a state of absolute chaos. In these early days, the scarred man named Guts wanders the land without a clear direction. He operates entirely on instinct and burning anger. He hunts creatures of the night, behaving more like a wild dog than a focused human fighter. His mind remains clouded by vengeance. He swings his giant sword with reckless hate, leaving trails of mangled bodies behind him. Those who witness his actions see a man forcing himself to act cruel. He pushes the world away with extreme violence, hiding his inner wounds behind a mask of pure malice. It takes time and much spilled blood for his true focus to firmly take shape. The first steps of this journey happen deep inside a quiet forest. We find Guts engaged in an unusual act for a man covered in scars. He lies intimately with a beautiful woman. They share a moment of raw passion on the forest floor. The air is cold, yet the heat of their bodies fills the silence. For a survivor who lives a life of constant danger, dropping his guard for simple lust feels completely out of place. A hardened killer seems to risk his safety for a fleeting moment of physical pleasure among the trees. The quiet intimacy shatters in an instant. The woman is a complete fake. Her soft skin begins to stretch and tear. Her face splits wide open to reveal sharp fangs. She transforms quickly into a huge monster craving human meat. This sudden shift reveals a harsh truth about the beasts stalking this land. These monsters possess a sharp intelligence. They study human behavior to exploit basic desires. By setting clever traps and hiding behind attractive disguises, they demonstrate a capacity for patience and planning. Their actions are completely wicked. They exist purely to manipulate and consume warm flesh. She assumes Guts is just another foolish victim blinded by beauty. However, the Black Swordsman expected this outcome from the start. He knew exactly what hid beneath that warm skin from the very beginning. He played the part of a foolish traveler on purpose, walking willingly into her snare. He allowed his body to be exposed because he needed the creature to feel completely in control. Only then would she reveal her true shape. He feels no shame in using physical intimacy to bring a target close. Furthermore, he watches a beautiful face mutate into a nightmare without blinking. This freezing calmness shows he has spent years walking among monsters. The sight of a transforming demon is completely normal to him. Now, completely naked and facing a giant beast, a regular soldier would panic. A proud knight might scramble for the massive sword of iron resting nearby to engage in a long duel for survival. Guts ignores his blade on the ground. He chooses a much faster method. His body tells a story of extreme survival, having lost his natural left arm long ago. He replaced it with a heavy shell of steel built for war. He simply raises this metal forearm toward the charging creature. The artificial hand drops downward with a loud click. A sudden flash of light tears through the dark woods, followed immediately by a massive explosion. He fires a loaded cannon hidden directly inside his metal limb. The blast blows the demon's head clean off her shoulders. Blood and burning meat rain down on the soil. Hunting such calculating threats requires a warrior to become equally ruthless. Guts executes his work with an icy efficiency. The fight finishes in a matter of seconds. He destroys his prey with shocking speed, proving he holds no mercy for the dark things of the world. Furthermore, this quick execution shows us that this specific monster is no random threat wandering the woods. She played a cruel part in his past. Watching her die from a close-range cannon blast serves as a fitting punishment for the pain she caused him long ago. The swordsman leaves the forest behind and makes his way toward a castle town, likely not far from the campsite where the night began. Dust kicks up along the stone paths of a walled settlement. Regular guards in chainmail and weary laborers fill the streets, blending into a dull crowd. Among them walks a giant shadow. Guts draws uneasy stares from the locals as he enters the town limits. He wears black armor, wrapped head to toe in black, with a heavy cloak hiding most of his frame. He walks among the common folk with a predatory gaze, making it clear he belongs to a completely different breed of warrior compared to the local militia. His path soon leads him into a tavern, and it is here that another figure enters the story. The local alehouse reeks of spilled liquor and stale sweat. Ordinary patrons sit frozen at their tables, keeping their heads down. A gang of rowdy soldiers from Coca Castle dominates the center of the room. They are engaged in a cruel sport. Their target is a creature rarely seen in human settlements. Puck, an elf roughly the size of a sparrow, finds himself tied firmly to a wooden beam. The soldiers laugh loudly, taking turns hurling iron daggers within inches of the squirming captive. The little spirit attempts to project false courage. He shouts wild threats, promising to rip out their throats and chew on their veins. Despite these loud boasts, his glowing face shows pure panic. He fully believes his life is about to end. Nobody in the room dares to intervene, paralyzed by the authority of the Koka garrison. The tavern doors push open. Guts steps into the dim light. He approaches the bar and casually advises the tavern owner to expect some broken furniture. For a brief second, it appears as though a righteous champion has arrived to defend the weak. That illusion shatters instantly. Guts does not issue a noble challenge. He raises a mechanical crossbow equipped with a rapid hand crank. Iron bolts spray across the room in a relentless storm. The laughing soldiers are slaughtered before they can even draw their weapons. Guts approaches one gasping survivor. He twists the man's injured limbs, using pure agony to guarantee obedience. He orders the bleeding soldier to return to his master and deliver a single phrase: "The Black Swordsman has come." Before the smoke can settle, a final Koka thug lunges forward in a desperate attack. Guts responds by reaching over his shoulder. He draws his primary weapon, a gigantic slab of iron known as the Dragon Slayer. It looks less like a sword and more like a raw hunk of metal forged to smash fortresses. With a single horizontal swing, Guts cleaves the attacker completely in half. The sheer force launches the man's upper chest across the wooden floorboards while his legs collapse in place. A stunned silence washes over the surviving tavern patrons. They stare in absolute shock at the scattered remains of the once feared gang. Guts simply turns his back on the mess. He locks eyes with his chosen messenger one last time to ensure the warning sinks in. Then he walks out the door. He completely ignores the tiny elf, still bound to the wooden post. He feels no urge to untie the captive or offer comfort. This massacre was never about saving an innocent life. It was a calculated act of butchery designed to send a threat. Puck manages to untangle his bindings and flies after the imposing warrior. Before the small creature can strike up a conversation, the local city guard arrives in full force. Overwhelmed by sheer numbers, Guts finds himself shackled and dragged down into the damp dungeons beneath the settlement. The guards apply brutal methods of interrogation, tearing at his flesh with iron tools. The local magistrate eventually arrives to explain the gravity of the situation. This cowardly leader arranged a sick pact with the bandits of Koka Castle. To keep his town safe from burning, he regularly shipped wagons filled with gold, young women, and children directly to the bandits' stronghold. By slaughtering the collectors in the alehouse, Guts destroyed this fragile truce. The magistrate shakes violently while speaking of the bandit master, calling the man a literal beast. Guts simply spits blood and reveals his true intentions. He noticed the cages full of crying women during his arrival. He knew exactly what kind of monster ruled the castle. slaughter in the tavern was a calculated move. The Black Swordsman wanted to destroy the cowardly agreement. He intended to punish a community that would gladly feed its own citizens to a monster just to sleep peacefully. He pulled the entire settlement into his personal war on purpose. Desperate to fix the broken alliance, the magistrate demands his torturers keep their prisoner alive. He plans to deliver the bleeding swordsman to Koka Castle as an apology gift. The scene shifts to the stone walls of the fortress. The sole survivor of the tavern massacre kneels before his master, reporting the arrival of a warrior wielding a giant blade. The lord of the castle immediately recognizes the description. Soon after, the weeping magistrate crawls into the throne room. He begs for mercy, offering twice the amount of silver and human cattle to make up for the dead men. His pleas fall on deaf ears. The Lord finds the display pathetic. To prove his monstrous nature, the castle master casually tosses a chewed human ear onto the stone floor near the magistrate's shaking hands. The ruler of Koka openly admits his only true passion is watching mortals perish in the most violent ways possible. His hunger for cruelty knows no bounds. The guards seize the screaming magistrate, dragging him away to fill their master's stomach. Deep underground, Guts rests against the cold stones of his cell. His body aches from the severe beatings, making simple movements exhausting. Suddenly, a shifting shadow in the corner catches his eye. A small, twisted shape crawls across the wet floor. It looks like a deformed infant, dragging its misshapen limbs through the filth. It has clearly tracked him across the land. Guts glares at the monstrosity and spits out, "You again." Pure rage takes over his exhausted mind. He screams violently at the tiny abomination to stay away. Right at the peak of his fury, the dungeon door swings open. Puck tumbles inside, completely missing the deformed infant because he slips and falls directly into a puddle of stale urine. The small spirit quickly recovers from his clumsy entrance. He proudly reveals a ring of iron keys, boasting that he knocked a guard unconscious to secure them. Guts shows no interest in the tiny creature. However, Puck insists on returning the favor from the alehouse. Puck explains that he owes a debt for having his life saved back at the tavern, and that among his kind, such debts are taken seriously. Elves have a very strong sense of duty, he says. He flutters close to the bleeding warrior, reaching out his glowing hands to examine the fresh cuts. The moment Puck's fingers brush against his skin, Guts reacts with explosive hostility. He violently jerks away, his eyes wide with sudden panic. The hardened killer, who laughs in the face of giant monsters, absolutely refuses to let anyone touch his skin, making it plain that being touched is something he cannot stand, for reasons left unspoken. Even so, Puck reveals another gift hidden beneath his jokes. The tiny winged creature ignores the harsh rejection and demonstrates a strange, natural gift. Shimmering dust falls slowly from his wings, settling gently over the prisoner's battered flesh. The results happen immediately. Deep cuts close rapidly, sealing split skin without leaving a trace. Huge bruises fade away as if they never existed. Puck explains that this glowing powder possesses strong restorative properties, capable of mending severe injuries in mere moments. Beyond simple physical healing, the elf claims to possess a unique connection to the minds of others. He can physically sense the feelings of those around him. He uses this invisible bond to project comfort into troubled hearts, hoping to bring joy to sad individuals. In this damp dungeon, a striking contrast forms. The small spirit shines with a pure, childish innocence. He embodies a gentle light, clinging to kindness and wanting to protect life. Beside him sits a hardened killer wrapped tightly in violence and anger. The pair represent completely opposing forces trapped inside a single cell. During this quiet exchange, the captive finally offers a name, Guts. As they speak, the faint glow of the dungeon torches briefly exposes a distinct mark carved directly into the swordsman's skin. This is the brand of sacrifice. The exact nature of this bleeding scar remains hidden for now, yet it clearly carries a cursed, heavy burden that draws danger like a magnet. Instead of explaining the symbol, Guts casually shifts the focus to the immediate future. He calmly admits he fully expects the ruler of Coca Castle to march out and burn the settlement to ash. The impending attack comes as no surprise to him. It was his exact goal from the beginning. He designed the tavern slaughter to force the beast out of its comfortable fortress. He knew the Coca forces would come seeking revenge, leading the monster directly to his blade. The winged spirit recoils in absolute horror. He realizes hundreds of innocent townsfolk will burn alive just to serve as bait for one target. Guts shows no concern for the local casualties. His mind fixates entirely on hunting his prey. He delivers a cold, brutal view of the world, stating plainly that fragile people deserve to perish. If a person lacks the physical strength to fight back, their death means absolutely nothing to him. As these cruel words fill the air, Puck suddenly collapses. The elf's unique ability to feel the emotions of others backfires violently. A crushing wave of hatred, malice, and suffering flows directly from the swordsman's soul into the tiny creature. The intense negativity brings Puck extreme physical pain, leaving him gasping for air on the wet stones. Showing no sympathy for the suffering elf, Guts doubles down on his harsh nature. He plainly states he felt absolutely nothing for Puck during the tavern massacre. He cared little if the flying creature survived the spinning daggers or caught a stray iron bolt. Stunned and deeply hurt by such freezing apathy, Puck decides he has endured enough. He flies away from the iron cage, abandoning the harsh warrior to the darkness. Despite his anger, the kind-hearted spirit leaves the stolen ring of keys resting safely on the stone floor. Soon after, the promised destruction arrives on the surface. Raging fires consume the wooden homes of the settlement. Koka Castle soldiers march through the burning streets, slaughtering any villager they cross without hesitation. Amidst the spreading flames, the Lord of Koka stands victorious. He lifts the lifeless body of a young child, hungrily drinking the fresh blood spilling from the corpse while the city burns around him. The burning streets run thick with blood and the foul stench of roasting meat. The soldiers of Koka Castle relax their guard, busy looting the ruined homes. Out of nowhere, a pile of freshly slaughtered villagers bursts open. The black swordsman rises from beneath the stacked corpses, completely coated in gore. Using the dead as camouflage allowed him to wait for the perfect moment to strike. He swiftly cuts down the startled soldiers standing nearby, their bodies joining the victims on the ground. Finally, he stands face to face with the ruler of the fortress. The local people never gave this tyrant a proper name, referring to him only by his royal title. His reptilian features earn him the name of the Snake Lord among the terrified townsfolk. The mutant stares at his challenger through the smoke. He recognizes the wandering hunter and declares that Guts has been tracking beings just like him. He names his kind apostles. Violence erupts instantly. Guts unleashes his repeating weapon, sending a storm of iron shafts flying straight into his opponent's face. The loud clacking of the hand crank fills the air. One metal bolt pierces the ruler's eye directly. The deep impact drops the beast to the dirt. To a normal man, a metal shaft through the brain brings instant death. Yet, the fallen ruler simply pushes himself back up. Several thick bolts protrude from his skull and chest, bleeding black fluid, but he stands tall. Guts refuses to entertain this dark magic. He cranks his weapon again and fires another volley. The sheer force throws the mutant backward. The ruler crashes heavily through the wooden wall of a nearby home. From the ruined building, a massive tail slithers into view. The Lord sheds his human disguise entirely. He emerges as a towering beast, mixing the bulk of a great ape with the scales of a serpent. Bones crack and skin tears as his true form takes shape. Complete panic sweeps the area. Even the loyal soldiers from Koka Castle drop their weapons and run away from their own master. The beast attacks with shocking speed. He whips his long tail forward, launching the swordsman through the air. The monster takes deep pleasure in watching the human struggle. He lands several crushing blows against his target. Guts hits the cobblestones hard. His ribs crack under the pressure. He vomits dark blood onto the street. The overwhelming physical power of the mutant leaves the swordsman unconscious on the ground. The giant beast approaches his defeated prey. He lifts Guts by his armor, bringing the bleeding man close to his large fangs. The mutant begins to boast loudly. He laughs at human frailty, claiming mortals exist only to fill the bellies of superior creatures. He wastes precious time gloating over his easy victory. He completely forgets about the mechanical left arm hanging near his face. Guts snaps his eyes open. He points his steel limb directly at the beast's mouth and pulls the hidden trigger. A loud explosion interrupts the arrogant speech. Fire and sharp shrapnel blow a large portion of the monster's head into the night sky. Stunned and heavily mutilated, the beast drops his grip. Guts lands on his feet and draws his heavy iron blade. He swings the weapon with all his remaining strength. The massive blade does not cut cleanly. The dull, rough edge catches on thick scales and bone. It violently tears the giant creature into two separate pieces. The top half of the beast crashes to the ground, spilling organs across the stones. The fight concludes, yet the swordsman desires more punishment. He stands over the bleeding mutant. He calmly loads his mechanical weapon. He fires iron bolts into the dying flesh one by one. The apostle breaks down into a sobbing, pathetic mess. Guts bends down and makes a cold promise. He swears to make this creature experience the exact same mortal fear that so-called pathetic humans feel right before they die. During this slow execution, Guts demands answers. He asks for the location of a group known as the God Hand. This mysterious name holds great importance to the swordsman, though its true meaning remains completely hidden from view. The dying apostle cries out that he knows absolutely nothing about them. Realizing the beast has no useful information, Guts turns his back. He leaves the severed monster to burn alive as the burning structures collapse around them. The black swordsman walks away through the scattered remains of the town. Watching him vanish into the smoke, Puck floats in the air and quietly mutters a single word to describe the man. Berserk. Leaving the ashes of the ruined town and the burning remains of the mutant lord behind, Guts travels far away from the destruction. His solitary journey leads him directly into the heart of a thick woodland. The dense canopy traps Guts in complete darkness. The surrounding roots seem to twist and reach for his boots. Pale spirits seep upward from the damp soil. Disembodied voices drift through the cold air to mock him. They confidently promise that running away is completely useless, and his capture is an absolute certainty. Ghostly figures suddenly lunge from the brush. Guts swings his massive iron, scattering the undead attackers with raw force. This endless violence defines his daily reality. A common knight might draw steel to rescue a burning village or claim a royal bounty. Guts slaughters monsters merely to secure another hour of survival. To him, the entire landscape operates as a lethal snare. Every shadow conceals a threat. The dead pursue him without mercy, forcing the swordsman to endure a life of absolute isolation. High above the blood-soaked soil, a songbird perches on a tall branch. Puck slides off the animal's feathered back. The small elf politely expresses his gratitude to the bird for the swift flight. Left alone in the trees, Puck scans the empty brush below. He mumbles to himself, trying to retrace the swordsman's exact route. Puck assumes Guts took the main trail, briefly wondering if a pack of wild hounds managed to eat the large brute. A sudden impact strikes the base of the trunk. The collision shakes the leaves wildly, sending Puck tumbling through the air. Catching his balance just before hitting the dirt, the elf spots the source of the crash. Guts stands below, resting his aching body heavily against the rough bark. Puck happily calls out the man's name. Guts slowly turns his head, groaning in pure annoyance at the sight of his persistent follower. Ignoring the cold reception, Puck hovers close to the man's bruised face. The elf fires off a steady stream of questions. He asks what caused the fresh injuries and whether wild beasts caused the damage. Puck even cheerfully offers to apply his healing dust once more. Guts loses his temper. His large hand snaps forward, pinching Puck's delicate wings tightly between his fingers. He calls the elf a bug and demands to know why this annoying insect continues to track him. The captive struggles, stubbornly insisting on being addressed by his proper name while explaining his motives. Puck views the brutal hunt as an exciting fairy tale, eager to witness the next monster fall. This naive excitement earns a harsh punishment. Guts opens his grip, dropping Puck straight into a muddy puddle. Smeared in wet earth, Puck demands a reason for the abuse. Guts looks down and coldly explains his absolute disgust for fragile creatures. He states that helpless beings who cling to others remind him of annoying flies. Their complete inability to survive on their own fills Guts with rage, making him want to crush them under his heel. Having delivered this cruel philosophy, Guts turns his back and abandons Puck in the brush. Shortly after this bitter parting, the sky darkens completely. Thick clouds unleash a freezing downpour. The dirt paths rapidly turn into deep sludge. Guts marches onward, his boots sinking into the muck with every step. The clatter of wooden wheels soon approaches from the rear. A simple horse-drawn cart slows down to match his marching pace. An elderly priest sits at the reins, traveling alongside his young daughter under the safety of a covered roof. Seeing the soaked traveler shivering in the storm, the kindly driver offers a dry seat in the back. He expresses genuine concern over the severe weather. Guts barely glances up. He flatly rejects the generous offer and demands the strangers leave him be. even after Guts turns him down flat. The priest doesn't let the matter drop and insists again. Guts finally stops walking and meets the man's eyes directly, telling him plainly that this is for his own sake. Evil spirits are on his trail, an entire pack of them. Riding together will only invite violence to the carriage. The old clergyman simply smiles warmly at the dark warning. He firmly believes divine grace protects his family from any harm. He also mentions that his wagon already carries a tiny creature of good fortune. Having exhausted his patience and feeling the cold rain seeping through his clothes, Guts decides to accept the offer. He climbs into the back of the covered cart. The moment he takes a seat, the brand on his skin begins to throb with fresh pain. He glares out into the pouring rain, feeling unseen eyes watching him from the dark woods. Under the wooden roof, Guts spots the source of the old man's supposed good luck. Puck sits completely dry inside the carriage. The two exchange annoyed glares. The small elf quickly defends his territory, telling Guts to hold back any complaints since the fairy secured a spot in the cart long before the swordsman arrived. The priest's young daughter, Colette, attempts to warm up the cold atmosphere. She passes a bottle of homemade wine to the large warrior, hoping the drink will restore his body heat. Guts takes a deep swallow. Seeing Puck eagerly begging for a share, the swordsman casually tosses the glass bottle over to the elf. As Guts relaxes slightly, Colette notices the countless heavy scars covering his exposed skin. She asks what kind of violence could leave a man so severely mangled. Guts gives her a completely honest answer, stating that supernatural monsters inflicted the damage during their endless pursuits. The priest chuckles nervously, assuming the warrior is simply telling a tall tale. He politely asks the man to stop frightening his young daughter with ghost stories. Trying to shift the focus, the holy man points at the giant slab of metal resting beside the warrior, asking if the heavy iron truly serves as a sword. Guts leans into heavy sarcasm, claiming he simply uses the giant object as a cooking utensil. The old man laughs at the joke, noting such a massive blade could easily butcher a large horse. However, the driver's cheerful mood quickly sours. Recognizing the marks of a seasoned mercenary, the holy man admits his deep dislike for men who earn coin through slaughter. He lectures the swordsman, insisting that anyone who builds a life around a blade will inevitably die by one. Guts answers coldly that this is exactly why he has no love for priests either. The humor drains from the older man's face, and a quiet sadness settles in as he shares that his own nephew once chose that same path, leaving home 5 years back only to die on some nameless battlefield, remembered by no one. He wonders aloud what life the boy might have built if he had only lived. whether he might have found a family of his own, or come to know some small joy before the end, calling the waste of it all foolish beyond words. Guts lets a heavy silence fill the carriage while listening to the sad tale. After a long pause, he asks the old man why any of that matters. The boy did what he wanted to do, and whether that choice was right or wrong hardly matters in the end, so long as he found something worth living for while he had the chance. Once death comes, that's the end of everything. Nothing waits beyond it. Nothing at all. Guts abruptly announces he needs to rest. He closes his eyes against the rocking motion of the wooden cart. Colette gently drapes a warm blanket over his broad shoulders. She softly hopes he finds peaceful dreams. However, she keeps her gaze firmly fixed on Puck instead of the scarred warrior. Puck notices the intense stare. The fairy mutters to himself, wondering why she is looking at him so closely. He cannot stop a large smile from spreading across his glowing face. Closing his eyes offers Guts no true rest. Sleep merely drops him onto a different battlefield. His mind plunges into a lightless hallway. He sprints desperately, running away from an unseen pursuer. The cursed mark on his neck splits open. Phantom voices slither through the dark. They tell him that escape is impossible. Invisible vines covered in sharp thorns wrap around his ankles, sending him crashing to the stone floor. Panic sets in as he reaches out to push himself up. He realizes his metal arm is completely gone, leaving him entirely helpless. From the blackness, the exact same deformed monstrosity he saw in the underground dungeon lunges straight for his face. Guts jolts awake with a loud scream tearing from his throat. He finds a twisted beast sitting heavily on his chest. Pure survival instinct takes control. Without a second thought, Guts grabs his heavy iron and crushes the creature into the wooden floorboards. The gory remains splatter dangerously close to Puck, who cowers in the corner. The sudden violence wakes the girl. Colette cries out in pure shock. The clergyman rushes toward the back of the wagon, demanding to know what kind of beast just died in his cart. Guts casually wipes the thick blood from his metal weapon. He explains that the squashed beast was an incubus. He describes it as a parasitic creature that survives by drinking human fear and eating nightmares. He grumbles under his breath, wondering out loud when he will ever get a chance to simply rest. The priest goes pale, asking if this means the earlier talk of evil spirits was true after all. Guts openly mocks the driver. He finds it hilarious that a man can dedicate his life to a divine creator while flatly denying the existence of literal demons. Puck hovers nervously. He asks why these foul things constantly hunt the swordsman. Guts points at the scarred mark on his flesh, explaining that the brand acts as a beacon for the dead. Suddenly, fresh blood spills from the scar. A deep wave of pain hits Guts. He kicks the carriage door wide open and leaps out into the pouring rain. He roars at the passengers to remain safely inside the cart. He explains, scanning the ground as he moves, that incubi are born from the blood and remains of people who died consumed by hatred, mixed with something far darker. Their presence here means bodies lie nearby, victims killed brutally enough to leave that residue behind, corpses that demons will soon claim and rise from before long. The storm triggers pure panic in the draft horses. The animals rear up, kicking their hooves wildly against the wooden harnesses. Colette ignores the pouring rain and jumps out of the carriage to calm the frightened animals. Guts immediately barks an order, demanding the foolish girl return to safety. But the warning comes too late. The muddy earth splits open. A rusted iron spear shoots directly out from the soil, plunging straight through the young girl's chest. All around them, the earth itself seems to split open, and what rises from it is an entire host of skeletons dressed in decayed armor, clawing their way up from wherever they've lain buried. Guts realizes in an instant that this ground must have once held a battle long forgotten. He's set upon immediately, throwing blade after blade into the advancing horde. The blades sink into bone, doing nothing to slow the advance. Puck shouts that there's no point fighting something already dead, insisting they need to flee this place at once. Guts refuses outright, telling him to run alone if he wants, because he isn't moving. The black armored warrior draws his giant iron slab. He states plainly that he has crossed paths with death countless times before, making this nightmare a familiar routine. Letting out a feral roar, Guts charges headlong into the skeletal ranks. He shatters ancient bones and ruined armor with sweeping strikes. Puck watches the slaughter in complete shock. He can only watch, stunned by how little it seems to matter to Guts whether his enemy still draws breath or not. Then a scream tears through the chaos. Puck goes still, calling out Guts' name in warning, and Guts turns partway, telling him to be quiet, that he can already see what's happening. Before the words die in his throat, the priest lies dead. His head torn from his shoulders, and standing above the body is Colette. Except it isn't truly her any longer. Something else now moves her limbs, some spirit that has claimed her corpse as its vessel. She raises a blade and starts walking toward him. For a brief moment, Guts' mind plays a cruel trick on him. He sees only the gentle child who draped a blanket over his shoulders and offered him a warm drink just minutes prior. This brief memory causes a fatal hesitation. Puck screams frantically, begging Guts to dodge. Colette thrusts the stolen blade forward, sinking the steel directly into the swordsman's stomach. The sharp burst of pain instantly shatters the illusion. Reality floods back into his mind. reacting strictly on survival instinct, Guts swings his massive weapon sideways. He cleaves the possessed girl entirely in half. Thick red blood rains down on the muddy road. Guts stands completely paralyzed, overwhelmed by his own actions. Sensing an opening, a nearby skeleton lunges forward and bashes the distracted warrior across the face with a spear shaft. Guts answers the blow automatically, reducing the bony attacker to dust with a single backward swing. As the shattered pieces hit the ground, a wave of physical sickness overtakes the swordsman. He drops heavily to his knees in the mud. His stomach violently rejects the events of the night, forcing him to vomit onto the earth. His mind reels from the raw shock of murdering a child who showed him genuine kindness. He forces the grief down deep inside his chest. He buries the pain beneath a rising tide of pure rage. He lets out a deafening scream that shakes the rainy woods. Pushing himself up from the filth, he throws his bleeding body back into the horde. He massacres the undead army without pausing for breath. He swings his iron slab continuously until the storm finally breaks and the morning sun peeks over the trees. The cleansing daylight burns the dark spirits. The remaining possessing entities shriek loudly before abandoning the skeletal troops and fleeing from the rays of the sun. Guts stands alone as the sole survivor, surrounded by small mountains of crushed bone and mangled bodies. Puck floats down slowly. The elf quietly states that the ordeal has finally ended. He looks sadly at the divided remains of the young girl. He tries to offer comfort, gently assuring Guts that he holds no blame for the tragedy. Guts rejects the sympathy with a dry, scratching laugh. He leans into his harsh worldview. He claims the father and daughter were fragile insects caught in someone else's war. He insists that individuals who lack the power to defend themselves are better off dying. He looks back at the ruined carriage, stating the pair simply lacked the physical strength to survive standing near a walking disaster like him. He claims this is the only absolute truth of the world. However, his voice shakes slightly as he speaks. He stares blankly into the distance, desperately trying to convince himself of his own lie. He mutters that a man who fears stepping on insects will never take another step forward. The morning quiet does not last. The unseen entities resume their taunts from the shadows of the tree line. The voices announce that escape is a completely pointless fantasy. They promise they are always watching his movements. They claim total ownership over his flesh, his blood, his sight, and his heartbeat. They demand his heart. Guts screams at the trees to shut their mouths. The unseen enemies push further, claiming his anger, his sorrow, and his fear all belong to them forever. Guts refuses to listen. He raises his metal arm toward the woods. He triggers his hidden cannon, sending a massive fireball blasting into the timber. The heavy explosion burns the trees and silences the taunting spirits. ringing blast fades into a heavy quiet. The early morning light catches a deep, hidden sadness swimming in the swordsman's eyes. Without speaking another word, he turns away from the carnage and begins marching down the dirt road. Puck remains hovering in the air for a moment, absorbing the harsh reality of the man's daily existence. The tiny spirit finally grasps the absolute hell this warrior survives every single day. Understanding the burden, the small elf quietly flies after the lonely hunter, continuing the journey by his side. The next chapter opens in the center of a busy stone courtyard. A local official stands on a raised wooden stage, reading aloud from a formal document. He speaks with bureaucratic coldness, officially declaring a sentence of death. He announces that the bound prisoner has struck a filthy bargain with demons and practiced forbidden magic. Because of these crimes, she must die immediately. The accused is merely a young girl. She thrashes desperately against the guards holding her arms. She begs the crowd for mercy, screaming that the charges are completely fabricated. She swears on her life that she practices no dark arts and begs the local authorities to recognize her innocence. Her desperate cries are cut short. A heavy steel blade crashes down, cleanly chopping through her neck. The sudden violence shocks the gathered townsfolk into complete silence. They watch the bloody display without daring to make a sound. On a private balcony overlooking the stage, the local official approaches a lavishly dressed nobleman who observed the entire spectacle. The official nervously reports that the task is finished. The count, a massive man with a highly satisfied attitude, congratulates him on a successful event. However, the official hesitates. He quietly voices his concerns to the bloated count. He points out that chopping off 5 heads in a single month might be pushing their authority too far. He worries that the king will notice the soaring body count and send royal investigators to interfere. The large nobleman completely dismisses the fear. He orders his men to round up any passing vagrant or suspected informant, commanding the official to label them all as cultists. The count frames his cruelty as a noble duty. He insists that slaughtering outsiders is the only way to keep his domain secure. He claims that managing the survival of his citizens brings him absolute joy, and he refuses to let any higher authority slow down his purges. The official bows his head in total submission to the brutal decree. Back on the execution platform, gravity pulls the girl's remains over the edge. Her severed head tumbles down the wooden steps and rolls through the dirt. It finally comes to a stop against a heavy iron boot. The black swordsman stands unnoticed at the back of the crowd. Guts slowly bends down. He grabs the bloody hair and lifts the lifeless face to his eye level. He stares quietly at a single, final tear frozen permanently on the dead girl's cheek. Suddenly, a young boy rushes toward the bloody stage. He cries out for his executed sibling, trying desperately to push past the armed perimeter. A guard strikes him down without hesitation, sending him sprawling to the ground. The sentry loudly warns the watching citizens. He promises that anyone showing pity for the condemned will rot in the deepest cells, children included. The aggressive guard then turns his attention to the large stranger standing quietly in the back. He marches up to the heavily cloaked warrior and demands the girl's remains. Guts answers by spitting directly into the man's face. Using his powerful right arm, the swordsman launches the decapitated head high into the air. The gruesome projectile arcs over the courtyard and lands directly on the royal balcony. Enraged by the disrespect, the sentry raises his iron spear. He never gets the chance to thrust. Guts steps forward and shatters the man's jaw with a brutal strike from his artificial metal hand. The Count leans down to examine the head lying before him and notices something branded into its forehead, a mark identical to the one carved into Guts's own neck. He mutters aloud in confusion at the sight, and for a moment, his eyes meet Guts's directly. Guts wipes away the blood seeping from his own brand, warns the Count that his throat will be next, a silent promise of murder, before calmly turning his back and walking away. The magistrate orders the soldiers to give chase, asking who this man could possibly be. The Count answers simply that he is known as the Black Swordsman, and finds the whole situation rather amusing, wondering aloud if this counts as some kind of declaration of war. Laughing deeply, the bloated tyrant squeezes his massive fist, completely crushing the young girl's skull into pulp. A chase begins through the twisting stone streets of the settlement. Guts navigates the tight alleys, unaware that a cloaked observer tracks his every turn from a safe distance. Despite his speed, the swordsman eventually hits a dead end surrounded by high brick walls. The pursuing guards close the trap. One soldier presses a steel blade directly against the fugitive's neck. He officially declares the stranger under arrest for conspiring with heretics, warning that any resistance will result in immediate death. In the span of a heartbeat, Guts grips the handle of his massive weapon. With one fluid motion, he cuts the soldier entirely in half. The remaining troops freeze in pure shock. They stare in disbelief at the giant slab of raw metal, struggling to comprehend how such a bulky object functions in combat. Their captain screams for them to attack regardless, and Guts continues butchering the troops, cutting them down one after another. High above the narrow street, a squad of archers sets up a firing line on a wooden watchtower. Before they can release their arrows, Puck materializes in the air. The small fairy shouts a quick warning to the swordsman and releases a blinding burst of light. The bright flash heavily disorients the bowman. Guts takes advantage of the distraction. He swings his heavy iron directly into the wooden support beams of the tower. The thick posts splinter instantly, bringing the entire structure crashing down into the alley. Puck hovers proudly, bragging that his quick thinking just saved the warrior's life. Guts simply grunts, annoyed that the flying creature is still following him. The elf demands gratitude, insisting the swordsman now owes him a massive favor. During this boasting, a surviving guard silently creeps up behind the floating ferry. Guts reaches out and grabs the attacker's wrist, cleanly chopping off the soldier's hand with a swift stroke. The sudden violence sends Puck falling to the stones in shock. Guts looks down and plainly states that their debts are now fully settled. The elf starts to loudly complain about the extreme violence. Before he can say more, a massive figure looms up behind him, and the surrounding soldiers erupt into cheers at the sight. They call out the name of Lord Zondark. This new arrival is enormous, towering well above everyone else present. Zondark carries an enormous war hammer. He looks down at the black swordsman, mocking the size of Guts's blade. Puck stares in awe at the sheer bulk of the new challenger. Zondark proudly declares he will test the strength of the oversized blade against his own crushing weapon. The giant swings his heavy hammer downward with immense force. Guts easily sidesteps the clumsy attack. Zondark recovers and swings widely a second time. The wild blow misses Guts completely and brutally crushes one of the royal guards instead. Zondark eventually traps Guts against a stone building and brings the hammer down once more. Guts steps away at the last second, letting the heavy iron smash uselessly into the masonry. Zondark laughs, taunting his cornered prey for running away. Taunting his cornered prey for constantly dodging. The giant mocks the oversized blade, loudly declaring that carrying such a massive weapon is completely useless if the fighter lacks the proper skill to swing it. Spotting a wide opening in Zondark's guard, Guts swings his iron slab upward. The crushing impact completely shatters the heavy hammer. Sharp fragments of broken metal explode backward, deeply piercing the commander's eye. As Zondark drops to his knees in agony, Guts drives a steel boot directly into his ruined face. He coldly agrees with the giant's earlier assessment regarding clumsy weapons, throwing the insult right back. Guts kicks the massive man into the crowd of terrified soldiers. The surviving troops quickly regroup, swarming forward to avenge their fallen leader. Puck shrieks in panic. Guts grips his sword tightly, frustrated by the endless waves of attackers. Just then, smoke bombs strike the ground around them, filling the street with thick fog. The stranger who had been shadowing Guts calls out from somewhere in the haze, urging him to hurry and follow. Guts follows the mysterious stranger through the gray cloud, slipping away just as the angry guards blindly order his execution. As they move through the streets, every window nearby slams shut the moment Guts passes by. Puck notes how unfriendly the people here seem, and their guide explains that absolute paranoia rules the settlement. A single accusation of dark magic means torture and death. The citizens live in constant fear of their neighbors, their old friends, and even their own flesh and blood. To survive in this domain, a person must view everyone else as a potential threat. They finally reach a sturdy wooden door. The stranger leads them into a hidden laboratory. The room is packed with glass jars containing preserved animal organs, strange beasts, and bleached bones. Puck can't tell if the man is some kind of butcher or herbalist until he spots the floating body of a preserved elf inside one jar and screams at the sight. Guts looks around the morbid room. He notes that a collection like this would easily earn a man a death sentence under the current laws. The stranger waves his hands frantically, insisting he is merely a medical doctor studying anatomy. Guts demands to know the stranger's identity and his reason for interfering. The man leans heavily on a wooden crutch, admitting he watched the defiance at the execution stage. He assumes the swordsman harbors a deep need for revenge against the ruling count. Guts responds aggressively. He kicks the wooden support away, sending the crippled doctor crashing to the floor, telling him plainly that he asks the questions here, not the other way around. Puck rushes to help the fallen man, loudly scolding Guts for his cruelty. As the fairy leans close, he recoils sharply at the sight of the doctor's horribly ruined face. The man slowly pulls himself upright while explaining that he couldn't risk letting the guards take Guts because he wants him to kill the count. He passionately begs Guts to cut the bloated ruler apart piece by piece. He insists the count stopped being human long ago, that he is truly a demon now, and points to his own missing legs and scarred face as proof, claiming the count himself cut them away and ate the flesh. He asks if Guts believes him, assuming otherwise. But Guts answers that belief has nothing to do with it. He already knows precisely what the man is. Pleased and overjoyed to find an ally who understands the brutal truth, the doctor turns toward the back wall. He announces he possesses something incredibly important to show the swordsman. He opens a concealed doorway leading into a secret, unlit chamber. Puck feels a cold chill wash over him, complaining that he senses something deeply wrong waiting in the dark. The man leads them into a concealed chamber deeper within the building and gestures toward what waits inside. And then, suddenly, the black swordsman is completely paralyzed. Guts can't find his breath, and when he finally speaks, his voice comes out low and rough, a disbelieving murmur as he names the item. A behelit. The crippled man notices the swordsman's intense reaction and asks if he recognizes the strange artifact. Guts reacts with explosive violence. He lunges forward, wrapping his large hand around the crippled doctor's throat. He lifts the struggling man entirely off the floor. Puck screams in panic, begging Guts to release his grip. Guts ignores the flying elf. He loudly demands to know the doctor's true identity and exactly how he acquired the cursed object. Gasping for air, the disfigured man swears the item belongs to the ruler of the fortress. He confesses he stole it directly from the Count's private chambers. Satisfied with the honest panic in the man's voice, Guts opens his hand. The doctor crashes to the wooden floor. The swordsman towers over him, ordering the crippled man to reveal absolutely everything he knows about the artifact. Catching his breath, the man finally introduces himself as Vargas. He explains he once served as the chief physician inside the royal castle walls. He paints a picture of the past, describing the Count as a harsh ruler who still maintained a human soul. That relative peace shattered exactly 7 years ago. The moment the local tyrant discovered that bizarre stone, his entire nature mutated. He started treating his subjects like discarded playthings. Vargas details the horrors that followed. The Count began skinning servants alive, tearing bodies apart for curiosity, and eventually consuming human meat. The constant accusations of dark magic and heresy are entirely fake. The Count uses the legal executions merely to secure a steady supply of fresh bodies for his dining table. Working in the castle became a daily nightmare. Unable to stomach the butchery any longer, Vargas planned a quiet escape. He packed his belongings and tried to slip away under the cover of night, taking his wife and 2 children with him. However, the castle guards caught the fleeing family before they could reach safety. They were dragged down into the deepest cells beneath the fortress. Vargas describes the torture that broke his mind. He was strung up by heavy iron chains. While he hung helplessly, the Count slowly carved off pieces of his face and limbs. Even worse, the tyrant slaughtered and devoured the doctor's wife and children right in front of his eyes. The sight of his family being eaten alive burned a permanent scar into his memory. Vargas admits a shameful truth about that moment in the dungeon. He felt no rage or sadness as his family died. Pure, paralyzing fear completely took over his mind. Desperate to survive, the doctor used his medical knowledge. He swallowed a specific mixture of drugs to slow his heartbeat and fake his own death. When the guards carelessly tossed his supposedly dead body aside, Vargas took his chance. He crept through the dark halls, managing to steal the strange stone object before finally fleeing the castle grounds. For the last 7 years, the crippled doctor obsessed over the item. He scoured ancient religious scrolls and hunted down underground scholars, yet he uncovered no clues about its true purpose. Looking up at Guts, Vargas pleads for an answer. Guts stares at the strange face carved into the artifact. He calmly explains that the item functions as a gateway key. He describes how the object bridges the gap between the mortal realm and a higher dimension. When triggered, the stone summons powerful entities from beyond the sky. These supreme demons manipulate the weakest, most corrupt parts of the human heart. Guts names this group of 5 demons as the God Hand. The sheer weight of this revelation leaves both Vargas and Puck frozen in absolute horror. Before anyone can say more, footsteps sound outside. Someone approaches the hideout where they stand. Back in the castle, the medical wing devolves into absolute chaos. Zondark thrashes wildly on a wooden table, completely blinded by the agony of his shattered eye. A castle healer desperately tries to apply fresh bandages to the bleeding socket, pleading with the giant commander to stay still. The soothing words only fuel the injured man's fury. Zondark mutters violently about murdering the Black Swordsman. His anger quickly boils over. He reaches out and wraps his massive hand around the healer's face. With a sudden burst of raw strength, the commander drives the man's skull directly into the stone floor, ending his life instantly. The heavy oak doors swing wide open. The Count steps into the bloody room, asking what all this commotion is about, clearly annoyed by the loud disturbance disrupting his castle. A nervous guard quickly explains the commander's unstable condition. Another high-ranking official named Dahl steps forward. He eyes the raging giant cautiously and advises the Count to retreat to the safety of his private quarters, given how dangerous the room has become. The Count instead orders Dahl to clear everyone out at once. When the official hesitates out of concern for his ruler's safety, the Count aggressively snaps at him, forcing every guard and servant to flee the chamber. Left alone with his master, Zondark completely loses his grip on reality. He smashes his own injured head repeatedly against the masonry, driven mad by the humiliation of his defeat. The Count steps forward and easily lifts the massive commander by the throat, displaying a level of physical strength that completely defies his fat frame. The Count asks if Zondark harbors a deep hatred for the Black Swordsman. Gasping for breath, the giant swears he would surrender absolutely anything to butcher his enemy. A cruel smile spreads across the Count's face. He agrees to grant this violent wish. The Count then unhinges his jaw unnaturally wide. A grotesque, fleshy parasite crawls up from his throat and drops into his hand. He commands his broken officer to swallow the demonic spawn and accept his dark gift. Sometime later, in the military planning room, a scout rushes in to deliver vital information to Dahl. the spy claims to have pinpointed the exact location of the fugitives' hideout. Pleased with the rapid discovery, the official quickly commands a squad of 30 armed guards to march on the building. The Count suddenly enters the war room and cancels the order, warning that such numbers would only cost them the advantage of surprise. He reminds Dahl of what happened earlier that same afternoon, as numbers clearly mean nothing to a warrior swinging such a massive blade. The Count announces he has prepared a far superior strategy. From the dark hallway, a mutated figure steps into the torchlight. Zondark steps forward, his body and face utterly transformed from what they were before. The Count addresses him directly, telling him the time has come to take whatever revenge his heart desires. Zondark answers by throwing his head back and releasing a deafening roar, a sound not like anything human, closer to the twisted cry of a beast than a man. Back in the hideout, Puck leans over the behelit, studying its carved features closely, even mimicking the strange face etched into its surface. He gives it a poke, marveling that it hasn't so much as twitched despite the odd sensation it gives off, calling it a real work of craftsmanship. Guts kicks him without warning, correcting him sharply that this is no mere craftsman's piece, that the thing is genuinely alive. Puck yells back, demanding to know why he wasn't warned before touching it. Guts explains that in its current state, it poses no danger, alive or not, and that it's easier to simply think of it as a tool. Puck asks how exactly it calls the god hand forward, and Guts snaps that if he understood that himself, none of this trouble would exist in the first place. As he studies the object, its single eye slides open and fixes on Puck. Guts turns to Vargas, remembering a question he'd meant to ask earlier, wanting to know how the Count first came across the thing. Vargas explains it happened purely by chance, purchased from a group of traveling merchants who knew nothing about its nature, only that they'd found it somewhere in a market far to the east. Guts seems not convinced that this was mere chance, as Vargas pulls out a map and points to a hidden passage leading out of the castle, one known only to the Count himself. Following it, he explains, should let them reach the main keep without running into resistance. He admits he wishes he could accompany them, but knows his condition would only slow them down, and reminds Guts that he has waited 7 long years for this chance, calling him his only hope, and begging him to see the Count avenged. He reaches out and grips Guts' shoulder as he speaks. Guts knocks the hand away and kicks him back, snapping at him not to touch him. Puck demands to know what's wrong with him for treating Vargas this way. Guts sneers that the sight of him turns his stomach, warning him again never to touch him, and asking mockingly if he's looked at himself lately. Vargas touches his own ruined face, shame washing over him, and Guts adds coldly that he's the real monster here, telling him he ought to at least try to make himself presentable. Puck scolds Guts for treating people so cruelly at every turn, only for Guts to flick him aside without a word. Quietly, Vargas says it doesn't matter what Guts thinks of his appearance, so long as the Count dies for what he's done. Puck sighs sadly on the old man's unfortunate state. Under his breath, Guts mutters something about weak, worthless people, then states plainly that he doesn't care about Vargas at all. He'll kill the Count, but only for his own reasons. Suddenly, Guts silences them both, catching the sound of approaching footsteps and warning that something is coming. The wall behind him explodes inward, and Zondark steps through the wreckage. Guts remarks that he's hard to kill, and Zondark swings his weapon. A blow Guts blocks, though the force sends him staggering backward. Guts realizes then that whatever stands before him is no longer human. Zondark roars back that he'll cut him to pieces regardless. Guts moves fast, cleaving one of Zondark's arms clean off with his blade, and Puck cheers at the hit, only for a new limb, warped and elongated, to burst forth in its place and reclaim the fallen hammer. Zondark chants for blood as Puck scrambles to hide inside a skull sitting on a nearby shelf, and Vargas curls into a corner in terror. Zondark swings again, promising to carve Guts into meat, and the resulting impact sends Guts crashing through a row of shelves. The two clash again and again, the force of it bringing the rafters down toward where Puck hides, only for Vargas to throw his own body over the elf, shielding him from the falling debris. Puck asks if he's all right, and Vargas answers that his own safety means nothing, that his only concern was for the little one beside him. More stone rains down from above, and Vargas covers him again, murmuring a prayer for them both to survive whatever monster this has become. Puck watches the fight unfold, amazed at how Zondark swings that massive hammer like it weighs nothing at all, too fast for his eyes to properly follow. And yet, Guts blocks every single strike. Guts matches that inhuman speed blow for blow, eventually parrying an attack and countering hard enough to sever Zondark's remaining arm, then following through with a strike that slices away part of his skull. The creature drops to its knees. Puck marvels at what he's witnessing, realizing that what looked like wild, reckless swinging was, in fact, the work of a true master of the blade. Despite half his head missing, Zondark somehow rises again, and from the wound left behind emerges the same parasitic creature seen before, praising Guts for his skill and calling it impressive work for a mere mortal. Vargas cries out in recognition, naming the Count outright. The creature turns its attention toward him, greeting him by name and noting how long it's been. Its gaze drifts to the behelit lying on the ground, and Vargas lunges to snatch it back before it can be taken. The Count accuses him of theft, promising that once he finishes with Guts, He intends to finish what he started with Vargas 7 years prior. Turning back to Guts, the Count remarks on how far he's pushed his body and skill beyond what any normal man could achieve, but reminds him that he remains mortal all the same, and that mortality guarantees his death eventually. As the creature lunges to attack again, the building itself begins collapsing around them. Vargas hurries Guts toward an exit, guiding him quickly through the chaos, and they escape out into the streets of the city beyond. Coughing through the thick dust, Guts sarcastically asks if a collapsing building was the doctor's grand idea of a secure escape route. Puck asks if the thing is truly dead, and Vargas asks in turn whether that really was the Count himself. Guts corrects him, explaining that what they fought was only a spawn, a lesser demon bound to the Count's will, driven by nothing but the urge to kill. He tells them this is where they part ways, but before leaving, asks one thing of Vargas in return: the behelit itself, calling it fair payment for killing the Count, since Vargas will have no further need of it once that's done. Vargas hands it over without argument, and Guts takes it, turning to walk off with a simple farewell. Puck calls back to Vargas to take care of himself, and Vargas answers in kind, wishing the same for him before Puck flies off after Guts. As they go, Puck remarks that people need something to keep living for, and that building toward the future matters more than chasing revenge alone. Vargas repeats the thought quietly to himself as he watches them disappear from sight, reflecting on what a kind soul the little elf turned out to be, before telling himself he can't remain in this ruined place forever and must move on. Just then, a warped, elongated arm bursts free from the rubble behind him and drags Vargas down into the wreckage. Puck catches up to Guts and immediately scolds him for how coldly he treated Vargas, pointing out that the man saved him, handed over both the map and the behelit, and deserved better than being left behind without so much as a word of help. Guts answers flatly that he could have managed everything himself except for getting his hands on the behelit, admitting only grudging thanks for that much, though he adds he would have simply taken it by force if it came to that. Puck presses further, asking if they aren't allies in this, both wanting the Count dead all the same. Guts laughs outright at the idea, scoffing at the notion that he and a man like Vargas could ever be called partners in anything. He states plainly that even if Vargas begged on his knees, he wouldn't lift a hand to help someone so broken and useless. Puck cries out at how heartless that sounds, and Guts snaps back that weakness holds no interest for him, accusing Vargas of only pretending at friendship as a way to drag him down into his own doomed fight. He turns his glare on Puck, telling him the same judgment applies to him as well, before continuing on without waiting for a response. Puck trails behind quietly for a while before suddenly ducking out of sight. Guts Guts stops as murmurs from nearby townsfolk reach his ears. Talk of another execution being staged. Whispers that the condemned man caused trouble earlier at the execution grounds, meant now to serve as a warning to others. Puck realizes at once who must be standing on that platform and grabs desperately at Guts, trying to pull him toward the square. Guts pays him no attention, calmly wiping down his mechanical hand as Vargas's earlier words replay in his mind. The memory of a family skinned and devoured before his very eyes. A man left a prisoner to his own fear, begging Guts to see him avenged. Without warning, Guts drives his metal fist into the nearest wall. At the execution grounds, the condemned man turns out to be Vargas himself. The Count looks down at him, remarking on how long it's been since their paths last crossed, 7 years by his count, and asks why such hatred burns in his eyes toward him. He notes that torture would normally be in order, but decides it unnecessary this time, telling Vargas he should feel grateful for the mercy. Leaning in close, he demands to know where the object has gone. Vargas says nothing in response, and the silence tells the Count everything he needs, confirming that the Black Swordsman must have taken it. Puck arrives at the grounds in a panic and spots Guts standing off in the shadows, flying straight for him, relieved and certain that some good still lives in him, insisting they need to act now. Guts only laughs at the assumption, correcting him that he came only to watch the man die. When Puck asks what he means, Guts points out the soldiers hidden along the castle walls, explaining that the whole scene is a trap, that stepping into view would mean being surrounded within seconds, and that he has no intention of walking blindly into a snare out of some misplaced sense of nobility. If Puck cares so much about saving him, Guts tells him to do it himself. Puck admits he can't manage it alone, and Guts tells him to be quiet then. To Guts, the man on that platform is nothing more than an ordinary fool who never learned to properly swing a blade, yet somehow convinced himself he could bring down something as monstrous as the Count. He states that ambition always demands its price, and dying without accomplishing anything is simply the cost owed by ambition too small to succeed, a man destroying himself through his own delusion. Puck senses something enormous burning beneath the surface of those words, a hatred turned inward that seems to be eating Guts alive from within, and wonders quietly whether that very self-loathing might be the true engine behind his strength. As the executioner forces Vargas's head down onto the block, Guts mutters that the man should have known his limits, that something small was always meant to live small. Puck whispers back that Guts is afraid. Confused, Guts asks what he means, and Puck explains that the old man is fighting a battle he can never win, and that Guts fears him precisely because it forces him to face the truth that his own fight is equally hopeless. He accuses Guts of refusing to admit how alike the two of them truly are, insisting that if he truly felt nothing, he wouldn't even be standing here watching. Guts seizes Puck roughly, gripping him hard enough to hurt, snapping that he talks too much for something his size. But seeing tears welling in the elf's eyes, he lets go. Puck bites down on his hand before flying off, and Guts mutters to himself, wondering aloud if he really looks like a man with any mercy left to give. Puck soars out over the gathered crowd, and the weight of their emotions crashes into him all at once. Fear, rage, grief, guilt, and panic tangled together until it feels like hundreds of voices are screaming inside his own skull. Somewhere within that storm, he picks out the sound of Vargas weeping. Glancing back toward Guts, standing distant and unmoving, Puck hesitates, torn over whether to step in, before finally making up his mind. He dives toward Vargas as fast as his wings can carry him, striking the executioner's blade mid-swing, though the impact only sends him tumbling to the ground rather than stopping the strike. The Count, annoyed by the interruption, orders the execution to proceed. Vargas locks eyes with him one final time and tells him his only regret is that he won't live to watch him choke on his own blood, warning that death is already coming for him, and that every soul he's murdered will drag him down to hell alongside them. The Count only laughs and repeats his order to finish it. With the last of his strength, Vargas screams out to the Black Swordsman, begging him to take the Count's head and hold it up before them all, calling for vengeance on behalf of everyone the Count has ever destroyed. The blade falls, and Vargas's head leaves his shoulders, his tear-filled eyes finding Guts one last time as it arcs through the air. Guts turns away and starts walking, the brand on his neck beginning to bleed once more. Down a narrow alley, Guts crosses paths with the Count's parasitic spawn, which has taken on the shape of Vargas's face purely to mock him. Guts flinches at the sight as it strolls past, Vargas's final plea still ringing in his memory, alongside the Count's own voice, noting with approval that the Black Swordsman chose wisely by never revealing himself. Later, a group of soldiers haul what remains of Vargas toward a mass grave, grumbling about the sheer number of bodies piled up and mocking the fool who actually believed he could kill the Count. The one carrying Vargas's severed head suddenly shudders, urging the others to hurry and finish so they can leave. A massive shadow falls across them, and turning, the soldier finds Guts standing right behind him. Guts cuts them all down without hesitation, then lifts Vargas's head from the dirt and studies the lifeless eyes staring back at him, noting the look of pure vengeance frozen there, and quietly vowing not to fail the way this man did. The brand on his neck erupts in pain, and the dead buried in the grave beneath him rise screaming, demanding their stolen legs, their arms, their heads returned to them. The spirits surge toward Guts, trying to force their way into his mind, shrieking that they want the Count's head for their own. Guts fights back against the intrusion and forces them out, roaring that there is nothing shared between him and the dead, that they are nothing now but refuse and ruin, and that this fight belongs to him alone. He is alive, flesh and blood still, and he will be the one to finish the Count with his own blade. And that was the last thing he said, walking away from the ruined graves behind him, in a scene soaked in dread and horror alike. To this end, we shall pause here and leave the rest of the tale for another night. Tell me, my dear, should I continue this telling? Or have you found it too heavy to rest easy after? Sleep now and decide later. For Guts' story is not an easy one to carry, nor a merciful one. What waits ahead is little more than a painting made of agony, horror, and betrayal. And yet, it remains a story worth listening to, all the same. For now, rest. I will tend to the candles as I always do, and I will keep watch over your sleep, so that your dreams come colorful and gentle, and your days and nights ahead are filled with quiet and with peace.